I was raised a practicing Muslim and remained one for almost half my life. I attended madrasas, that is, Islamic schools, and memorized large parts of the Quran. As a child, I lived in Mecca for a time and frequently visited the Grand Mosque. As a teenager, I sympathized with the Muslim Brotherhood. At 22, while my family was living in Kenya, my father arranged my marriage to a member of our family clan, a man that I had never met. I ran away, made my way to Holland, studied there, and eventually was elected a member of the Dutch Parliament. Now I live in the United States. In short, I have seen Islam from the inside and the outside. I believe that a reform of Islam is necessary and possible, and only Muslims can make that reform a reality. But we in the West cannot remain on the sidelines as though the outcome of this struggle has nothing to do with us.
Okay, so first of all, first thoughts I'd like to share. Notice how she was quick to jump to the idea that we Muslims need to reform Islam, that Islam quickly needs a reformation. That's going to be important coming down the road, all right? That's going to be something to keep in mind with when we examine some future comments of hers in the video. She is very adamant and very clear that Islam needs a reformation. We need to reform Islam. Like Islam is like barbaric. Islam is prehistoric. Islam is for the caveman. She hasn't used these words obviously yet, but let's be honest here. That's what she's saying, okay? Islam is not something, Islam is just inherently bad and should be changed. We need to reform it. Okay. Now, you can think that if you'd like, that's fine. That's not my issue. My issue isn't you thinking that. Obviously, as an atheist, you would love nothing more if Islam was to disappear, if Islam was to be reformed. Reforming Islam, getting rid of Islam, I don't see a difference because Islam is not something that's changeable. Islam is not something that we change. We don't change the laws of God. We don't change what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. Allah tells us what's good and bad, what's right and wrong. We stick to it regardless of what other people think. So to me, in my mind, changing Islam and reforming Islam, I don't see a difference. One is just a bit more of a watered down version. The second statement is just a watered down version of the first, okay? Changing Islam or no, we're just reforming Islam. Yeah, no, cut the BS. You want us to change. You want us to basically get rid of Islam, right? You want us to create something else. You want us to basically strip strip Islam of everything that makes Islam what it is, and just label it as Islam. Just to appease the people. No. Islam is Islam the way it is, and there's no other Islam. There's no other way Islam could be. Okay, Islam is not a buffet. It's not like Burger King. Have it your own way, right? No, it's not like that. They would love nothing more if Islam was like that, right? But needless to say, it's not. Islam is we Muslims are firm in what we believe and firm in what we say is right and wrong. No questions asked. All right. Now, but I want you guys to keep this in mind from what she said. She says Islam needs to be reformed. In other words, she's advocating for us, for Muslims, to change Islam. She's advocating, and she's adamant that no, Islam cannot just remain the way it is. We have to change it. We have to reform it. We have to modernize it. We have to do something to it. We can't just leave it as is. It's the way it is now is unacceptable. Keep that in mind. Keep that statement in mind. Let's continue.
If the jihadists win and the hope for a reformed Islam dies, the rest of the world will pay a terrible price. The terror attacks in New York, London, Madrid, Paris, and many other places are only a preview for what's to come.
Okay, so a couple of things. So just a couple of things. By the way, I'm enjoying this collage. Very good, alhamdulillah. But a couple things here. Do you know what this? When I first saw this video, do you know what this reminded me of? For those who don't know, there was something called, from what I know, it's called the Great Scare. Essentially, during the 20th century, the United States basically was really, really freaked out about the idea of communism spreading. They had this idea known as the domino effect. Basically, if communism takes over one country, it'll lead to other countries being taken over, which will lead to more countries taken over, which will lead to the whole world being taken over by communism, okay? Basically, it's a big fear factor, a big, basically fear that this idea is going to spread and it's going to take over and it's going to destroy our way of life. Now, what she said right now is basically, You see, this idea of reforming Islam it should be basically she's saying that reforming Islam should be a goal for it's something the West should push forward as well, right? This isn't something that we should just leave Muslims to worry about or leave the liberal Muslims to worry about. This is something that essentially all people around the world, or at least the West, should be concerned about. Now, like I said, this is very similar to that of the Great Scare. We all know the Great Scare in the 20th century is essentially what led to things like the Vietnam War, the war in Afghanistan. Actually, maybe not. Well, maybe the war in Afghanistan, but definitely the Vietnam War, definitely the Korean War, and it led to many, many other wars and conflicts throughout the world in America's hopes and attempts to stop the spread of communism. Cost the lives of millions of people around the world, right? Almost led us to put us on the brink of nuclear war, right? So this, I couldn't help but just draw a resemblance from the Great Scare of the Cold War to her perception of Islam and how we need to modernize Islam and how the West shouldn't be silent on this. The West needs to be involved, right? This is exactly what they said about communism. Communism, it's something we really needs to, the communist system needs to be, the Soviet Union really needs to be reformed. It really needs to, now just to be clear, I'm not a fan of communism. Don't misunderstand me here. I'm not saying communism is good. Don't misunderstand me. But this exact rhetoric is essentially what the American rhetoric was. That of, well, you know what? Communism, it's such a dangerous ideology. It really needs to be reformed. It really needs to be changed. And we Americans should not be just sit on the sideline. We have to do something about it. We have to propagate this. We have to put forward, the idea of reforming communism. We can't just sit on the sideline. And what did that mindset ultimately lead to? Well, ultimately that mindset led to the domino effect, which was the idea, okay, you know what? If communism spreads in one country, it'll lead to the spread of communism in other countries. And so we have to stop it before it spreads, what did that mindset lead to? The Korean War, the war in Vietnam, arguably the war in Afghanistan, and a large number of conflicts that America was either direct or was mostly indirectly, but directly did basically fund or directly did support throughout the world, right? Conflicts everywhere from Latin America to Africa to Asia to Eastern Europe, right? This mindset of those people over there, they have an idea or they have a way of life and it's dangerous. And we need to do whatever we can to stop it or contain it or reform it. Ultimately, people don't realize that mindset is what leads to things like the Cold War, right? Because ultimately, what was the Cold War about? America's attempt to stop communism, America's attempt to keep communism from spreading. And so what would they do? And what did that lead to? The domino effect. Oh man, they could take over in that country. We got to go stop it before it spreads to other countries, which led to a bunch of wars, which led to a lot of innocent people dying and suffering, right? Now, this just goes to show how much of a Western simp or a Western puppet, Ayaan Hirsi has pretty much become, to the point where not only is she willing to, has she left Islam, which is, you could leave Islam, go ahead. Good riddance. We don't need you, right? But to the point where she's willing to adopt the superiority complex of the West, and essentially the whole, we have a way of life and we need to stop that other way of life from spreading. It's very sleazy. It's very, very like, some people, it's a bit subtle. Like some people like that may not be the first thing you think of when you hear these comments, but in reality, think about it. She obviously is an advocate for the Western secular way of life. And she's pointing over there and saying that way of life there, dangerous, bad, and it's spreading and it needs to be reformed. And we need to get involved. We as the West need to get involved. You know what I'm saying? It's honestly, it's very sneaky, but it's also a very concerning mindset, to have, to see this woman have. But anyway.
For this reason, I believe that attacks dies. If the jihadists win and the hope for a reformed Islam dies, the rest of the world will pay a terrible price. The terror attacks in New York, London, Madrid, Paris, and many other places are only a preview for what's to come.
And also one thing I want to point out, something I definitely want to point out. Notice how she conveniently only listed terrorist attacks that happened in the West, despite the overwhelming majority of the terrorist attacks by these supposed Muslim groups happening in Muslim countries, right? The overwhelming majority of suffering and death caused by these groups has been in the Muslim lands, right? Now, why do you think she didn't bother to mention that? Why do you think, coincidentally, she only mentioned terror attacks that happened in the US and in the West? Why? It's quite obvious, because she's trying to paint the narrative that, okay, Islam has a problem, and that problem is going to spread around the world, and it's clearly negatively affecting the West. First of all, there's so many wrong things with that. We can get into what's wrong with all these terrorist attacks, how all these terrorist attacks clearly violate fundamental teachings of Islam. But putting that to the side, we don't even have to go that far. Just look at where the majority of these terrorist attacks are happening. I did a YouTube short a couple days ago where Sam Harris was essentially, basically essentially praising ISIS as these, as these examples of Muslims, as basically, yeah, these are the true Muslims, essentially, what he was trying to say. And he was basically saying everything they've done is supported by Islam. Well, the majority of their victims, the people they've killed, are all Muslims. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if these people actually thought that Islam taught that you can murder, forget innocent civilians, innocent Muslim civilians. It wouldn't surprise me if their intellect was that low. But needless to say, most people's intellect isn't that low. So that's why they don't bother to mention, hey, by the way, the majority of the victims of ISIS and these terror groups are Muslims. But that obviously that doesn't paint the, oh, Muslims are trying to take over the world mindset. That doesn't fit that narrative, right? Because obviously, if they were to point out all the terrorist attacks that have happened in Muslim lands, which are where the majority of these attacks have happened against Muslims, killing innocent Muslims, right? Then, well, it would become obvious. Well, okay, well then this is clearly not an issue primarily for the West. In fact, it's primarily for the Muslims. These attacks. It's not as if Islam is making gains in the world and that's leading to these attacks. Well, first of all, if Islam truly teaches these, if Islam truly teaches if these terror groups are truly Muslims and truly representations of Islam, why are their primary victims Muslims? Right? That puts a direct hole through their narrative. That's just one big fat thorn in their side, right? The fact that the majority of these victims are Muslims. It would be a dream come true if they could somehow paint a narrative where basically ISIS are only killing non-Muslims. There's no way they would ever kill non-Muslims. There's no way they would ever kill Muslims, right? Because obviously Islam only allows supposedly the killing of non-Muslims. But obviously these people are so shameless. They don't care that and what does this also show? The fact that she's only showing terror attacks from the West, the very small minority of terrorist attacks, which we're not downgrading. We're not downgrading these terrorist attacks. These terrorist attacks were terrible. A terrorist attack in any land is terrible. On any innocent civilian is terrible, Muslim or non-Muslim, right? So, and in fact, the funny thing is, arguably killing Muslims would be worse. So that's even worse for ISIS because the majority of their victims are Muslim. So the fact that killing them, because obviously, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it here. Killing innocent civilians is forbidden in Islam, period. But I mean, I'm pretty sure that if you're a devout Muslim, it wouldn't make sense to think, oh yeah, killing Muslims is not as bad. It wouldn't make sense to think killing Muslims is not as bad as killing non-Muslims. But the fact that you're killing more Muslims, hello, really? Yeah, subhanallah, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. You really need to learn to see behind the scenes, right? To see behind the curtain, right? To see what goes on backstage, right? On the front of the stage, what do we see? We see, Ayaan Hirsi Ali pointing out, oh, this terrorist attack in New York and in France and in England and this Western country and that Western land and this. Okay, we don't downgrade those. We don't disregard those. But why do you refuse to acknowledge all of the terrorist attacks? Why are you only willing to acknowledge those, right? Oh, because you're trying to paint the narrative that Islam is trying to take over the world and Muslims are out to get everyone and Islam is this thing that's going to destroy everybody. And so, needless to say, the only terrorist attacks that would fit that narrative are the ones against non-Muslims, even though the majority of terrorist attacks by these extremists is against the Muslims. Right? You need to learn to see behind the scenes like this. You need to learn to be able to see behind the curtains, see what's going on backstage. Backstage, these guys aren't stupid. They're fully aware. Well, maybe they are, but they're not that stupid. They're fully aware. If they took the time to research and to know about all these different terrorist attacks in the West, sure as hell, they knew about the terrorist attacks. When they made this video, they knew about the terrorist attacks that happened in the Muslim countries, which is where the majority of these attacks took place and have taken place. But of course, needless to say, why would they mention those? Because they want to paint a picture of Islam invading the world and taking over the world, and it's very, again, very shady that they would only care about the deaths of non-Muslims, but they wouldn't care about the deaths of Muslims, right? I mean, if I, as a Muslim, was to completely disregard every single terrorist attack that happened in a non-Muslim land and only focus on those that happen in Muslim lands, what would that make me look like? That people would take advantage of that and they'd use that against me. Oh, why are you only caring for terrorist attacks against Muslim lands? What about the non-Muslim lands? Do their lives not matter? Sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that, brothers and sisters. So yeah, just be sure you can see behind the scenes. Obviously, these people aren't stupid. They're fully aware that the majority of attacks happen in Muslim lands and kill mostly Muslims. But of course, to paint Islam as this invasive force taking over the world, obviously they conveniently only chose to show the attacks in non-Muslim lands. Because what are they trying to say? Oh, Islam's taken over. Look at these attacks. This non-Muslim land, this non-Muslim country, this non-Muslim city, this non-Muslim place. Sure, yeah, the majority are happening in Muslim lands, killing mostly Muslims. But don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Islam's taken over. Look at all these attacks in the non-Muslim lands. It's very, very selective sources and very selective judgment.
For this reason, I believe that it's foolish to insist, as Western leaders habitually do, that the violent acts committed in the name of Islam can somehow be divorced from the religion itself. For more than a decade, my message has been simple. Islam is not a religion of peace. When I assert this, I do not mean that Islamic belief makes all Muslims violent. This is manifestly not the case. There are many millions of peaceful Muslims in the world. What I do say is
even that's kind of like an insultingly ridiculous understatement. There are millions of Muslims who are peaceful. Well, Islam makes up about 1.8 billion people. So when you say millions of people, what are you saying? Like what? 10-15% of Muslims are peaceful? You saying, yeah, exactly. It's billions, not millions, right? It's millions sounds nice and it sounds like a lot of people. The problem is Muslims make up about a quarter of humanity, right? Between 20 and 25%. 1.8, 1.9 billion people. So when you say millions, what? You mean like what? 10% of the Muslims, 20% of the Muslims, right? So anyway.
Is that the call to violence and the justification for it are explicitly stated in the sacred texts of Islam. Moreover, this theologically sanctioned violence is there to be activated by any number of offenses, including but not limited to adultery, blasphemy, homosexuality, and apostasy, that is to leave Islam.
Okay, so basically what she did was she named out a bunch of crimes things that an Islamic state, a real Islamic state would consider basically crimes, right? It says theologically sanctioned violence. Well, first of all, what do you mean by violence? As Muslims, we don't believe in vigilantism. Okay. If there is a state being run by Sharia, right, then you have crimes, which are obviously, and then you would have police, you'd have courts, you'd have judges, you'd have, you'd have, court hearings, you'd have testimonies, you'd have evidence and lawyers and this, that. Like you have these things, right? You have basically, a system where there are crimes, there are criminals, and there's a system of, which obviously there's a system of capturing criminals and how to punish them, right? It's not just, no, but it's when she says theologically sanctioned violence, what do you mean? You mean theologically sanctioned laws and punishments for those laws? What do you mean by violence, right? Now, if she means by violence, if she means, oh, Muslims can go around with hacksaws, okay, let's see who committed adultery. Okay, who's an apostate? Obviously, first of all, both of those topics, punishing apostasy and punishing adultery, those are very complicated topics. Not complicated because we want to like simp to the West like she is, because genuinely, it's not just, oh, okay, he committed he committed adultery, for example. Okay, come, bring him. It doesn't work that way, right? There's a certain amount of evidence that's required. Even if the evidence is met, there are other conditions that have to be fulfilled. It's an entire system. It's not just, oh, this would be the equivalent of saying, okay, in the States, if you steal something, you get the death penalty. I mean, the death penalty is gone in most states, but at one point it was there. Imagine me saying, well, guess what? In Texas, you steal something, you get punished. Or if you steal something, they come and commit violence against you. You'd say, well, okay, first of all, theft is a crime. It's not just some deed. It's not just something you do. It's a crime. It's considered a crime. Now, if you don't consider it a crime where you're from, that's on you. Fine. But in Texas, or in other states, theft is considered a crime. And it's not just violence. Oh, they commit violence against you. Well, no, there's a state with laws and they have punishments for violating those laws. Likewise, things like adultery and blasphemy and all these other things, right? These are considered punishments. Again, blasphemy with inverted commas, adultery with inverted commas, right? Apostasy with inverted commas, right? Because obviously it's not just as simple as, oh, that guy over there, he's an apostate. Okay, bring him over here. Oh, that guy over there, he committed adultery. Let's go get him. It doesn't work that way. But with what do you call it? With the system, if the system is put into action, if the Islamic system and the Islamic Sharia is put into practice, and then someone is found guilty of adultery or guilty of this crime and that crime, then of course, Islam as a political system, as well as a theological system, will institute a punishment. But to simply write that off as, oh, Muslims are violent against that Islamic Sharia condones violence against those people. Well, I mean, I don't know if a legal punishment would be accurately represented by calling it violence. Oh, is the death? Imagine, like, for example, what do you call it? That state over there is very violent. They have the death penalty. The death penalty isn't like just something people walk around and do, right? The death penalty is an actual, like, court decided, there's a system in place that institutes that punishment. There's a system in place that's designed to give that punishment fairly to who deserves it and who doesn't. It's not just, nilly-nilly. Like I said, we don't believe in vigilantism or anything like that. So, but it's just strange how, they would like this how much they would water down Islam to the point where they would describe legal punishments, like legal, like court decided punishments, as, oh, theologically sanctioned violence. I mean, okay, by that definition, every punishable crime and every punishment in the West is a secular sanctioned violence, right? every punishment for theft, every punishment for murder, every punishment for any crime in the West, by that default, would be considered a secular sanctioned violence, right? If Muslim, or if the Sharia's, sorry. Sorry, my sisters just have this thing. They just walk into my room, subhanAllah. You know, you could knock. Man, subhanAllah. May Allah bless them. But may Allah give me patience. Anyway, alhamdulillah. What was I saying? Right? And I think I made my point clear. The if legal punishments in Islam are considered theological sanctioned violence, okay, then by that virtue, every punishment sanctioned by the West on criminals would be considered a secular sanctioned violence. Absolutely, like that's a very unacademic and unintellectual watering down of state law and of jurisprudence. But anyway, let's continue.
Those who tolerate this intolerance do so at their peril. As someone who has known what it is to live without freedom, I watch in amazement as those who call themselves liberals and progressives, people who claim to believe so fervently in individual liberty and minority rights, make common cause with the forces in the world that manifestly pose the greatest threat to that very freedom and those very minorities. In 2014, I was invited to accept an honorary degree from Brandeis University for the work I have done on behalf of women's rights in the Muslim world. That invitation was withdrawn after professors and students protested my criticism of Islam. My subsequent disinvitation, as it came to be called, was no favor to Muslims, just the opposite. By labeling critical examination of Islam as inherently racist, we make the chances of reformation far less likely.
Sorry, I'm not muted. There's nothing wrong with critical skepticism. Sorry, let me say that right. Wait, hold on. What was the word she used? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with critical examination of Islam. I do, however, have a problem with hypocritical examination of Islam, right? I do have a problem with hypocrisy. Critical thinking is one thing. Hypocrisy is something else. Now, what hypocrisy am I talking about? Let's find out.
There are no limits on criticism of Christianity at American universities or anywhere else for that matter. Why should there be of Islam? Instead of contorting Western intellectual traditions so as not to offend our Muslim fellow citizens, we need to defend both those traditions and the Muslim dissidents who take great risks to promote them.
Really? Let's rewatch that. I want everyone to rewatch that.
Christianity at American universities or anywhere else for that matter. Why should there be of Islam? Instead of contorting Western intellectual traditions so as not to offend our Muslim fellow citizens, we need to defend both those traditions and the Muslim dissidents who take great risks to promote them.
So notice what she said here. Why should we twist Western values to appease the Muslims? Why should we change Western values to appease Islamic tradition, Islamic belief? And yet, do you guys remember what she said earlier? Islam needs a reform. Islam needs to change. And we need to support, and she just said that right now, we need to support those who are trying to change things. So you want us to reform our beliefs to fit your beliefs, and yet you firmly stuck on saying, no, we can never twist Western values to try to appease the Muslims. You don't want to twist your values, fine. Go ahead. We don't have your values. No problem. But don't come to us and tell us, well, we have to have a reformation. But then in return, you then start insisting, like, guys, you can't tell Muslims you have to reform, but then complain to others who want to twist Western values in Western society to appease others, right? If you don't want us to appease, like, look, if you don't want to twist your values to appease us, why would you expect us to twist Islam to appease you? Is this not shameless hypocrisy? This is absolutely shameless hypocrisy. This is absolutely shameless hypocrisy. She is like, she's openly. So this is ridiculous. Absolutely, the level of this hypocrisy is astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. She's a bastion of, she's telling Muslims, you have to reform your religion. And also, not only that, but she's telling the West that the West has to be involved and it has to support this reformation of Islam. And yet, she's firmly saying, nope, Western values should not be twisted to appease the Muslims. We should be firm in our Western secular liberal values. Absolute hypocrisy. Absolute hypocrisy, subhanAllah. And it gets worse. It gets worse, by the way. You think that's the worst? Just give it a second.
We should support these brave men and women in every way possible. Imagine a platform for Muslim dissidents that communicated their message through YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. These are the Muslims we should be supporting for our sake as much as for the sake of Islam. In the Cold War, the West celebrated dissidents such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Andrei Sakharov, and Václav Havel, who had the courage to challenge the Soviet system from within. Today, there are many dissidents who challenge Islam, but the West either ignores them or dismisses them as not representative. This is a grave mistake. Reformers such as Tawfiq Hamid, Asra Nomani, and Zuhi Jasser, and many others must be supported and protected. They should be as well known as Solzhenitsyn, Sakharov, and Havel were in the 1980s. If we do in fact support political, social, and religious freedom, then we cannot in good conscience give Islam a free pass on the grounds of multicultural sensitivity.
So everyone notice? What was she doing there? She was listing up, by the way, I don't know any of those people. I haven't looked any of them up. But regardless, just so you guys know, now, I haven't looked up any of those people, but now notice something now. What was she just doing now? She was naming off individuals who worked and ironically, the example I used earlier, in communist Russia, people who were challenging the status quo, challenging the laws, challenging the way of life from the inside. And she's also doing she did the same thing for Muslims. She said, oh, look, here are these Muslims who are challenging Islam from the inside, challenging Islam from within Muslim countries, challenging the status quo, challenging the laws, etc. But now let's wait and see what she has to say next. Check this out.
We need to say to Muslims living in the West, if you want to live in our societies, to share in the material benefits, then you need to accept that our freedoms are not optional.
Oh, what just happened? What just happened? She's openly supporting she's openly supporting reformers and, progressives in the Muslim world. But when it comes to Western values, what does she say? Not an option. This is how it is. This is our way of life. You have to respect it. What's going on here? What is going on here? This is absolutely shameless hypocrisy, right? This is the same thing that her butt buddy Sam Harris, someone she's done a lot of work with closely, right? This is like this is the same rhetoric her butt buddy Sam Harris was doing, right? Oh, Muslims are so oppressive. Muslims are so terrible. Muslims this. But we have our way of life, and we're not going to change it. We want to empower. We want to empower change. This is what Sam Harris did. He accused Muslims, if I remember my video correctly, he accused Muslims of trying to work within the Western system, work within, like, from the inside, trying to change trying to challenge democracy, trying to change the West from the inside. And then what did he do a few minutes later? He praised the Muslims, the liberal Muslims in the West, in the Muslim countries, who are trying to change things from the inside. Exactly. American exceptionalism. Exactly. Thank you. Right. 1 second, they're accusing Muslims, or this is not what she's doing. This is what Sam Harris did. He accused Muslims 1 second of trying to change the West from the inside, trying to influence the West, trying to impose they're trying to secretly impose their values on the West. And then what did he do a few minutes later? We need to empower the reformers in the Middle East. We need to empower the people changing things in the Middle East. If you have a problem with us supposedly, because he, if you think we're just playing it low key, trying to change your society, you have a problem with that. Why are you supporting the exact same thing in our countries? Why? Again, hypocrisy, right? As it was said, American exceptionalism, right? What is she doing? What is Ayaan Hirsi Ali here saying? What did she say before? What is Ayaan Hirsi Ali here doing? Ayaan Hirsi Ali here is telling Muslims, look, you need to respect our Western values. These are not optional. You have to respect them. If you're going to come here and prosper here, you have to respect them. And then yet, just a few minutes earlier, what did she say? Islam needs a reformation. Muslims need to change, and we need to empower the Muslims who are progressive and trying to change Islam. I need a second, man. I need a second. This is what the heck, man? Oh my god. I need to stretch that out. Oh boy. Oh my god, man. This is absolutely just absolutely ridiculous, man. The video's almost over. I think the video's. Let me see.
Islam is at a crossroads of reformation or self-destruction. But so is the West. I'm Ayaan Hirsi Ali of Harvard University for Prager University.
Yeah, that just further goes to show if you're going to study Islam, don't study in the West, because this is the kind of people that places like Harvard and other places will look up to, unfortunately. I know, right? Harvard. This is absolutely like, dude, I don't know how. Like, we have our way of life. You can't change anything about that. Our way of life is not optional, but you have to reform your way of life. Oh man, this is what happens. This is just absolutely that's hilarious.